Hi everyone, so we're going to continue with our discussion on our muscular system here, talking about our oxygen supply and cellular respiration. So we know that our blood is going to carry all of the oxygen that we need for aerobic respiration from our lungs to our body cells. So when we see aerobic, we know that is with oxygen. Okay, so that's the kind of respiration that's going to happen with oxygen. Our oxygen is going to bond to hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the pigment responsible for those red color in the blood. And this myoglobin is going to store oxygen in our muscle tissue. So that's what's going to give our muscles this red-brown color. So this is going to be really important because cellular respiration is going to be the main thing that gives our muscles the energy it needs to do that contraction. Remember that energy is that ATP molecule. So if oxygen is not present, that means anaerobic respiration is going to take place. And anaerobic means without oxygen. So with this type of respiration, we're going to see the production of two lactic acid molecules be made from our glucose, which this is our glucose molecule. Right there, glucose. So when we break down this glucose, instead of going into our citric acid cycle and making a lot of ATP, we're going to just do glycolysis, which is going to make this lactic acid, and that's going to interfere with our muscle contraction, making that muscle fatigue. So when you are doing an activity for a long period of time and you're not getting enough oxygen to your muscles, this is why your muscles become sore after really long strenuous activity. Remember, with anaerobic respiration, not as much energy is being produced. We only get 2 ATP from this anaerobic respiration. So once we have done our exercise, we went into this anaerobic respiration, not enough O2 is present. This lactic acid is made. It has to be converted after exercise. So we're going to see an oxygen debt. So the amount of oxygen we need to convert lactic acid back into glucose. So we have to pay that price, and that price is usually muscle fatigue afterwards for this oxygen debt here. So if we take a look here, this is the absence of oxygen in the top. So right here, this is anaerobic respiration. So if we're in anaerobic respiration, we see those 2 ATP made, but we also see that lactic acid. But if we have enough oxygen coming, we're going to continue and come do this citric acid cycle here. So this would be aerobic respiration. And we're going to see the synthesis of much more ATP and that heat, which, remember, one of our main functions of the muscular system is going to be creating that heat to maintain our stable body temperature. So here's the difference between these two types of respiration. We definitely want to see more aerobic respiration rather than anaerobic respiration because, again, we'll see less of that lactic acid buildup and we'll see less of that oxygen debt. And with aerobic respiration, we're going to see much more energy made, which is good because we'll be able to have those regular muscle contractions without having to pay that debt. So again, if we take a look, we're taking our glycogen. We know glycogen is that energy storage in our muscles. So we're converting that glycogen into glucose, which is that usable molecule. We're going to use that glucose. We're going to synthesize some ATP. If we have that lactic acid, we're going to see that breakdown, the oxygen debt, but we're also going to see that we need energy to come into this cycle as well to be able to break down that for that aerobic respiration or that anaerobic respiration. Either way, energy is needed for both of those processes, but when we go into that aerobic respiration, we're able to get more out of it than we would with our anaerobic respiration. So now we're going to talk about some different types of muscles that we're going to see here. So slow twitch muscles or red muscles. These are going to be packed with that myoglobin pigment that's able to hold on to that oxygen. We're going to see a really large number of blood capillaries, which again is going to contribute to that oxygen availability, able to diffuse that gas into our system quickly. We're also going to see they contract slowly, which is why we call those slow twitch muscles. These are really good because they were able to generate a lot of ATP aerobically. So that's with oxygen, without that debt that we can see. We can contract for long periods of time without fatigue. So you're going to see these muscles with athletes who do long distances rather than short sprints. So these muscles are really going to help athletes. That's why we see animals who have to have long endurance have a lot of slow twitch muscles rather than animals who just do a quick sprint. So this is for endurance. Okay. Where our next type of muscle are fast twitch muscles, which are our white muscles, we're going to see fewer mitochondria, so that's less respiration happening. We're also going to see fewer blood capillaries, so there's not as much oxygen in these areas, along with that less myoglobin. We're going to see aerobic metabolism, which is going to be very present here. Remember, that is without oxygen. And we're going to see that we can't sustain these contractions over long periods of time because we're going to see that buildup of lactic acid. And if we don't break down that lactic acid, you could actually see a lot of long-term effects with that. So that's why we can't sustain those contractions for long periods of time. But again, this is going to be good for our sprinter animals. So generating a lot of force in a very short amount of time. So that's the type of muscle that you're going to want to see for those animals. Next, we're going to talk about muscles in a larger picture. So all of the stuff that we've been talking about mostly has been talking about muscles in our more cellular structure. So let's talk about muscles in our big picture, our macro scale. So we have different muscle actions, and we learned about some of those movements with our joint section. But with muscles specifically, we can see we have two words that are going to help define them. We have origin and insertion. So our origin is the immovable end of the muscle, and our insertion is the movable end of our muscle. So when we have muscles, so if we have an origin, we're going to know that that's where we're moving up towards or down from. So for an example here, some muscles have more than one origin insertions. Our biceps brachii, that bi tells us how many origins we have. So let's think of an example right here. So when our biceps brachii, our insertion is going to pull on its origin to see our elbow bending. So if we think of, here's our arm, our biceps brachii is right here on our humerus. Its insertion point is over here. This is its insertion. Our origin is up here towards our shoulder. When we pull on this bicep muscle, it's going to pull on its insertion, moving it upwards like this. And it's going to result in that shortening of that muscle. We're going to see it shorten and still see those origins and insertions here. But that's those movements that you're going to observe for this. So our insertion, wherever that insertion is, where it's going to pull on that muscle, is the direction that we're going to see it moving in. A few more words that we're going to see are prime mover, because we know that we have many, many muscles in our body. Our prime mover is going to be responsible for most of that movement. Our synergists are assisting our prime mover, and our antagonists are working against that prime mover. So they're doing the opposite movement of that muscle. So if you think of antagonists like in a story, they're usually the bad guy. In this case, again, we're relating to that because we see that we're working against this prime mover here. So we can see that here. This is a picture I kind of drew. So here's our biceps brachii. It has two origins here. It's connected over here to our radius bone. This is our insertion point. So when this biceps brachii pulls on this radius bone, we're going to see flexion of our arm here. So that's going to be that movement that we see here. So this is where we're going to end. You guys will end up labeling a bunch of these different muscles on the human body. I'm not going to focus on the names of these muscles very much in this section, but what I want us to focus on is that muscle contraction. So we're going to go through and make up our different steps for our muscle contractions in class together. If you have any questions, make sure we reach out and ask.